Welcome back to the Tiny Room Hanger. This is Mike, and today I want to talk to you about the return of Diecast of the Masterpiece Transformers. And some of you might be saying, well, never went anywhere. What do you mean return of this? Well, we've had a conversation about Diecast and where did it go? And now we're starting to see Diecast show up in more and more offerings. So what does it mean to have Diecast in your figures? It is a quality feel, a premium feel. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about how it's returning and where we're seeing it coming up. So all the people out there that almost solely collect the fans' toys, they already have pretty much every figure full of Diecast. But for people who collect multiple different companies, specifically Takara and a few of the other ones, they have kind of noticed this lack of Diecast for a few years and are starting to see it come back. In the early days, Takara set the expectation of 12-inch figures for a Masterpiece line, and also just full of Diecast. Big, heavy chunks of Diecast. And that changed very quickly after their first release. When they started doing the Autobot Carbots, they pretty much took out all the Diecast. They were all plastic. One of the jokes was the only metal in the figures is in the screws. I thought that was funny, but the reality is they were trying to get the price point down, but this still cost the same as what I paid for my MPO1 full of Diecast. It didn't make sense to me in my head. They're both $60 figures to me. Moving on down the road, Takara did make their Soundwave, which did have some Diecast in the feet, I believe, and that's about it. And that was a turnoff to me. I was like, it just didn't feel as quality and premium as I had expected. I still liked the figure. I still have the figure. But the lack of Diecast was a bit of a turnoff. Staying in line with the Carbots here, of course, Hound didn't have any Diecast in it whatsoever. But I felt like this could have been one of those figures that would have benefited from some Diecast. So many people had so many problems with breakage with this figure. It almost melted in your hand is the way it felt in sometimes. But I felt like if some of these thin parts were made of Diecast metal, then they wouldn't break as easy. But now I'm starting to hear some reports, some reasons why they don't use such thin metal is because of the fact that when it gets that thin, it can bend and will not bend back the proper way. There has to be a certain level of thickness to the Diecast metal for it to hold its own consistency, and a strong plastic would have been better. But the whole solution to this was better, stronger plastic. Where this really takes a fun turn with the return of Diecast is when it comes to these new Seekers. Now, I didn't really see a lot of Diecast, but there is some that nobody really expected. It's in the chest and in the pelvis waist area. Doesn't really add a lot of weight to the figure. It doesn't really even give it that super premium feel, but you can do the cold touch method on the chest underneath the little gun area that flips up and you have some guns underneath there. But this is nice Diecast, nice and cold. I think of the pylons, or whatever you call the things on the shoulders. Those are Diecast too. The thing is that even third-party distributors don't recognize the Diecast in it. There's not a lot. It's not a lot. But looking through here, if you look under product features for MP52 on TF Source, not only does it say it's made of plastic, you look 1, 2, 3, 4 down, but then 2 more down it says, yet again, made of plastic. Nor does it say it's Diecast. And it has, maybe this was a sneaky maneuver on Takara's behalf, or nobody just believes that Takara's actually put Diecast back in their figures. Now, you can't really talk about Takara without Deformation Space in the conversation, and I have to say that I prefer the Deformation Space versions, but there's not a whole lot of Diecast in them. I mean, I really can't even, off the top of my head, think of where the Diecast is in them, but there is so much weight to these figures versus Takara's, and I can't even think of where the Diecast is, and it does feel like a pretty solid premium figure, but I don't feel a lot of Diecast in the Deformation Space figures. So again, we get back to the whole topic of Fans Toys has always put Diecast in their figures. You know, Fans Toys doesn't just put Diecast in their figures. The thing is, they flaunt it. Look at this picture. This is their TFCon pictures revealing these figures before they came out. And obviously we have all these now. But this old picture, I held on to this because I knew that they flaunted this diecast, and you could see exactly where the diecast is in these. I wish they would continue doing stuff like this because it's a lot of fun. All of the new reveals, we don't see this anymore. This is kind of a thing of the past, or maybe it's a one-time deal, or maybe this picture shows it's much, much further along in development. Anyway, however, or whatever reason we don't get to see this anymore, this is how diecast should be used. It's not being used as just an accent. It is major components that are made of thick die-cast metal, and it gives it a solid premium feel, along with, of course, plastic items, and it's all going to be painted. Fans Toys did not let us down with the Robot Paradise and that Soundwave. That thing has die-cast, it feels solid, it feels like a Fans Toys release, and I really do like it. Of course, it made my top 10 Masterpiece figures of 2021 list, but it is a great figure, and it continues what Fans Toys been doing with die-cast. I don't have my rig yet, but I hear a lot of good things about the die-cast in it. You know, there's some pluses and minuses to the figure. I guess I'll get to that when I get it and I review it. We know there's going to be a bunch of die-cast in this Tesla 2.0. No one really has it to review it just yet, but we know it's going to be full of die-cast because, well, that's what Fans Toys does, has always done. It's what they do. It's all they do. Well, they do a lot more than just die-cast. But I really was shocked to see how much die-cast was in the cassettes, or at least the one I've handled so far. But I've got these 3 that I'll be working on pretty soon, and still a lot of die-cast metal in these, which requires a lot of paint, which gives them quite the presentation. Looking at a couple of other companies real quick, we do have the Toy World and the Toy World Leia, which is their version of RC. A lot of people hate this figure, but it does have some die-cast. Now, one of the problems with that is it has die-cast painted lower legs with plastic thighs that don't exactly match. So that's the downside, and a bad alt mode. That's really the only 2 downsides to this. I think it's a great figure. Side by side with Fans Toys, which is full of diecast, almost to a detriment for that figure. My Fans Toys Rouge keeps falling over, and one day that paint's going to get scratched up. Transform Element, they really did a pretty good job. I believe this is a great figure right here, this Mirage that they made. My copy was good. Other people had issues with theirs, but anyhow, it does have some die-cast in the feet and in the knees, and a few other places, the chest. So there is die-cast, and this is something all along with this company. If you remember back to the MP44 era, where people were talking about how this is the best Optimus Prime that's ever made, it's the best Masterpiece version, they love it way more than MP44, then you would kind of feel that this one is full of die-cast. It has a heft to it, it has a really nice paint job, and so the fact that it does have some die-cast to it is quite impressive. I'm just curious how they're going to make the transparent die-cast. They are making that mold transparent. I'm sure it's all plastic. That's just a joke, guys. But getting on to Mirages, so MMC's not really known for using a lot of die-cast in their figures. A lot of people like to jump to defend MMC. Say, yeah, they do have a lot of die-cast in their figures. But no, I actually quoted in the last video about die-cast that there's no die-cast in this. I was wrong. The tips of the engines have die-cast, and the connector that connects the plastic spoiler on, and a couple of other parts, but the arms and the legs, major components to this, they have no die-cast that I could feel. I touched everything, no cold touch feeling to it, and it doesn't really matter. It doesn't make it any worse of a figure that it doesn't have a ton of die-cast in it. It's just something I like to point out. And since I've recently handled this guy way more than I probably should have, he's got some die-cast in him that I just didn't expect. Actually, I've had the figure for a while, and I hadn't messed with him in a while, and so when I was doing a lot of comparisons and stuff, I was just really impressed with the amount of die-cast that was in this figure, and I'm comparing it to a $40 figure, a $120 figure to a $40 figure. I paid $80 because that was back when I bought it. It was $80, now it's $120. But I'm impressed by the heft. I'm impressed by the quality feel of the die-cast and the paint that's on this guy. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that they use die-cast in it. Now, getting into X-Transbots, they are kind of hit and miss on die-cast. I would say there's more hits on die-cast with X-Transbots than misses. When you get into their mini-bots, they're largely made of plastic. Now, I think their boost or whatever has some metal in the feet and the lower legs, the shins and kind of stuff like that. Not much in this guy at all. Then Cosmo comes out as like a heavy brick. You don't want to like tie Cosmo to your leg and go swim in the ocean because you might drown, because that thing's got a lot in it. That thing's heavy. That thing is heavy. So with that, they are kind of hit and miss, and some of these are full of diecast and just chocked full of them. Some are mostly plastic. Now I have their Trailbreaker, and I've actually had 2 of the versions, and there is diecast in it, but it's not a lot. It's not like a ton of diecast. It's still mostly plastic, but there is diecast, and where it is, it's painted, and where it's painted well. And in fact, I think this is going to have a better overall paint job that shines through in the alt mode than Fans Toys, but I think the Fans Toys will have a better, much better paint job in bot mode. I mean, you really can't beat what Fans Toys does in the paint department on bot mode. And Fans Toys is going to beat this when it comes to diecast, but overall aesthetic and overall design, they're really, really close. But X Transbots is coming back really strong with their diecast. There is quite a bit of heft and weight and diecast metal in this figure right here. Their lock figure has quite a bit of diecast and heft, and it makes it feel solid. And maybe even that is some of the problem with this, because it does have a lot of weight and it's hefty and heavy. But with that, everything's painted on this guy, and the paint scratches a bit. Those are some issues with such a complex transformation, or so much going on with so much paint. It's hard to not scratch this guy. But I just pulled Jansen out of the box today to feel him, and man, that thing is full of diecast. I think it's got even more diecast than even Cup did, their lock figure. So this Perceptor is just fantastic. It is leaps and bounds past Tesla 1.0, and I haven't even gotten into messing with transformation or anything like that yet, but the thing is very hefty, very solid, and I'm impressed so far. And I don't have this one just yet, but X Transbots puts diecast in this guy too. I watched a couple of partials of some people's videos on this to kind of see the gist of it, but I read the descriptions. In the description, it actually said that there's diecast in there. I did snap this picture. I guess I should have snapped it of some different ones too, but this one shows that it does have diecast in lock, and that's something that's advertised for X Transbots, but not at all advertised for Takara. So what does the future hold for diecast in our figures? Well, I think there's just going to be more of it. I don't think Takara is ever going to go back to the days of the MPO-1. I think we're lucky to get the bit of diecast they put in their figures right now, and I'm happy with it. I don't even know if the boost and what all them reboost or whatever and skids, if they have any diecast going on with them, but I know it's in the Seekers, or at least so far what I've handled, there's some diecast there. And so I'm kind of happy with that. Can't lie though, I wish there was more. Whatever Takara does, others follow. Of course, Fans Toys has still been doing what they do no matter what. Same thing with X Transbots. But anyway, let me know what you think. Have you guys noticed the return of diecast in your Masterpiece Transformers? Are you excited about that, happy about that? Or are you a little more disappointed because of the downside with the paint scratching and all of that good stuff? Let me know in the comments below. Like and subscribe, and Titanium Hanger out.